Okay, let's just jump right in. If you try to picture 1915, what do you see? I mean, for most people, it's probably black and white, right?
Maybe a Model T sputtering down a dirt road.
Exactly. But 1915 was this year of just a violent collision.
Yeah.
You have this deep, profound contradiction where, massive technological leaps are happening at the same time as this stunning social regression.
And all of this is happening while the terrifying rumble of global war is finally reaching America's shores.
That's it. For the United States, 1915 was the turning point. It really was the critical moment when that traditional, isolationist stance just became politically and morally impossible to hold.
Well, you see the energy of the progressive era, which is still going on, clashing violently with these two huge forces. First, the growing, unavoidable pull of the Great War.
And second,
The explosive realization of America's own deep internal social fault lines.
and that's why we wanted to do this deep dive. We're giving you a shortcut to being fully informed about the forces that made this year such a hinge point in American history.
We're really zeroing in on three major transformations.
Right. First, the swift, dramatic collapse of America's protected neutrality.
Then, the explosion of social and racial extremism happening right here at home.
And finally, the engine of technological change that was quietly and very quickly building the infrastructure of a future superpower. So for America, the Great War, it stopped being a distant tragedy on one specific day, May 7th, 1915.
That's the day a German U-boat torpedoed and sank the British ocean liner, the Lusitania, right off the coast of Ireland.
And that sinking didn't just rattle the nation.
Oh, it did more than that. It ripped the protective shell right off of American isolationism. Before May 7th, the war was, European problem.
After May 7th, it was a domestic crisis.
Absolutely. Almost 1,200 people were killed, and crucially, 128 of them were Americans.
And that's the number. That was the moment the public was forced to see that this conflict had consequences for them.
Yeah, and it put President Woodrow Wilson in a truly impossible situation.
Because he'd already warned Germany. He said he would hold them to strict accountability for any loss of American lives.
Right, but the American public, you have to remember, they had this impossible double wish. They wanted Germany to stop the U-boat attacks, yes.
But they were also overwhelmingly against actually sending American soldiers to Europe to fight.
So Wilson shifts his strategy. He goes from this sort of theoretical neutrality to what our sources call active diplomatic confrontation. He decides to act through these very stern protest notes,
Demanding that Germany immediately cease unrestricted submarine warfare.
which was a clear political tilt toward the Allies, even if the U.S. wasn't officially, declaring war.
But that aggressive posture, it caused a split right inside his own cabinet.
It did. The diplomatic stance was so provocative that his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, a massive, famous pacifist, he just couldn't stomach it. He resigned in June of 1915.
And his argument was that Wilson's notes were basically just a prelude to war, right?
Exactly. He thought they were unfairly biased toward Great Britain. And Bryan brings up this really critical question. If the Lusitania was carrying 173 tons of war munitions for Britain,
Which Germany officially said was their justification for the attack.
right, so how was Wilson able to maintain the moral high ground in demanding strict accountability?
It's a huge ethical gray area. But Wilson was, well, he was a master politician. He managed it by focusing the American narrative purely on the loss of civilian life.
He just sidestepped the whole munitions issue.
Completely. He focused instead on Germany's barbarism against non-combatants, and that allowed him to maintain this powerful moral stance, even if it wasn't a strictly neutral one.
And while Wilson was walking that tightrope, you have the Hawks just screaming for action.
You mean former President Theodore Roosevelt?
He was never shy, was he?
Yeah.
He openly attacked Wilson's measured response. He reportedly called Wilson's famous "too proud to fight" speech a sign of abject cowardice.
Wow. And that kind of pressure from Roosevelt's camp, it fueled the preparedness movement, which was demanding this huge military expansion right away.
And that political pressure was absolutely crucial. It provided the political fuel that directly led to the National Defense Act of 1916. The foundation for war was being laid, even while America was still technically neutral.
So the threat of the U.S. entering the war was actually potent enough to make Germany back down?
Temporarily, yes.
Yeah.
Germany issued something called the Arabic Pledge later in 1915, promising not to sink passenger ships without warning. It was purely a strategic move to keep America out of the fight.
But the domestic damage was already done. The outrage over the sinking kicked off this wave of intense nationalism, this 100% Americanism.
And suddenly, German Americans, who had been very well integrated, were facing intense questions about their loyalty. Their whole identity was under a microscope.
The narrative had completely shifted.
And we should note, this wasn't happening in a vacuum. The U.S. was busy consolidating power closer to home, too. On July 28th, the U.S. began its military occupation of Haiti.
An occupation that would last for almost 2 decades.
Right. And later that year, they formally recognized the Mexican government of Venustiano Carranza. So the U.S. was an active global player regardless of the European War.
And as a quick sort of counterpoint to all this military prep, you have Henry Ford's Peace Ship.
Oh, what a story. In December, he charters a ship, the Peace Ship, to sail to Europe and try to mediate an end to the war himself.
It was a spectacular, very public failure, but it just goes to show how polarized the country was, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Between those preparing for war and those desperately trying to stop it.
So if the Lusitania was the external shock, 1915 also saw these internal fault lines of race, religion, and class just violently exposed at home.
And we have to start with the Leo Frank case, which reached its just devastating climax in August.
This case is a horrifying example of what happens when prejudice and mob rule completely override the law.
It is. Frank, a Jewish-American factory superintendent, had been convicted of murder. But in June 1915, the governor, John Slayton, commuted his death sentence.
Citing new evidence and, reasonable doubt.
Right. But that act of clemency was met with murderous public outrage. On August 17th, Frank was violently abducted from the prison farm.
And then lynched by a mob in Marietta, Georgia.
What's so chilling is that this mob, which called itself the Vigilance Committee, it wasn't just a random group. It included prominent local citizens, lawyers, even a former state governor.
Unbelievable. Governor Slayton himself was threatened and actually forced to flee the state.
It showed that, in that moment, organized extremism held more power than the government itself.
And this tragedy, coupled with this inflammatory new movie, became the catalyst for both organized extremism and organized defense.
You talk about D.W. Griffith's film, The Birth of a Nation.
Yeah. It premiered in February 1915. Technologically, it was a marvel, the first real Hollywood blockbuster.
But its story was just overtly racist. It demonized Black Americans, and it glorified the Ku Klux Klan as heroic saviors.
The NAACP condemned it fiercely, of course.
But the film was wildly popular and incredibly influential. The power of that movie, combined with the public violence of the Frank lynching, led to 2 very different organizational legacies.
2 diametrically opposed legacies.
On one hand, the lynching spurred the founding of the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, to combat rising anti-Semitism.
And on the other,
on Thanksgiving night, 1915, the Ku Klux Klan formally reestablished itself on Stone Mountain, Georgia. One side organizing for defense, the other for hate.
And that struggle against entrenched power, it wasn't just limited to race and religion, was it?
Not at all. Shifting gears a bit, 1915 was a huge year for the women's suffrage movement. It showed both a big defeat and their overwhelming public strength.
So on January 12th, the U.S. House of Representatives rejects a proposal to grant women the right to vote. A clear political setback.
But the movement didn't dissolve. It mobilized. Later that year, on October 23rd, 25,000 women marched up Fifth Avenue in New York City.
Wow, 25,000.
This wasn't just a protest. It was a visible, powerful display of organization that politicians just couldn't ignore anymore.
And finally, in this section, we have to look at just how fragile life was for the working class. And nothing crystallizes that horror more than the Eastland disaster in Chicago.
July 24th. The steamer Eastland capsized while it was still docked in the Chicago River.
The ship had been chartered for the Western Electric Company's annual employee picnic. You can just imagine the excitement.
A day off, a family outing that just instantly turns to horror.
Yeah.
844 lives were lost.
Including 22 entire families.
Just devastated that specific working class community in Chicago.
And here is the truly profound, tragic irony of it all, which says so much about industrial safety back then.
Yeah, the investigation revealed the ship's instability was actually made worse by the added weight of new lifeboats.
Lifeboats that had been mandated after the Titanic disaster.
So a precaution that was meant to save lives actively contributed to the disaster. It's just heartbreaking.
So all of these immense social and international crises, they're unfolding against a backdrop of incredibly rapid technological change.
That's right. In 1915, America was, it was fundamentally building the infrastructure of a global superpower, often powered by the very same people who suffered in tragedies like the Eastland.
A key moment for connectivity was January 25th, the first transcontinental phone call.
Imagine the significance of that. Alexander Graham Bell in New York, speaking to his old assistant, Thomas Watson, in San Francisco.
This wasn't just a novelty act. It was a technological declaration that, for the first time shrunk the American continent.
Businesses, government, families, they could now connect instantly, coast to coast.
And industrial supremacy was being proven daily on the assembly line. On December 10th, Ford produced its 1 millionth Model T.
And that milestone, it wasn't just about selling cars. It was a global announcement about the power of mass production. The Model T was literally changing the landscape of American life forever.
But we have to keep that success in context. And this is where it all connects back. While Ford is hitting that million-car mark, the reality for the workers building them was brutal.
Very brutal. Unemployment was still high, near 10%, and the average manufacturing worker had a 55-hour work week.
A 55-hour week that came with staggering danger.
The industrial death rate was 61 deaths per 100,000 workers. There was virtually no effective government regulation or insurance to protect them.
The technology was advancing at lightning speed, but protecting the human beings powering that engine was just lagging so far behind.
Government institutions, though, were trying to modernize. NACI, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the predecessor to NASA, was founded in March.
Setting the stage for 20th century aviation dominance.
And the U.S. Coast Guard was formally designated as a military branch in January. This streamlined the nation's security apparatus just as global tensions were rising.
The Progressive era's focus on conservation also continued, providing a bit of a contrast to the industrial hustle.
Right. Rocky Mountain National Park was established in January, and Dinosaur National Monument in October. A push to embrace the future while preserving the past.
And finally, you see this growing scrutiny of public health. The case of Typhoid Mary Mallon, came to a head in March 1915.
She was re-quarantined for life. She'd been released and had gone back to working as a cook under a false name, infecting numerous people.
This case is so fascinating because it pits public safety directly against individual liberty, doesn't it?
It does. The state asserted its right to indefinitely detain someone who posed a continued risk, even if that person felt perfectly healthy. A huge debate for the era.
And just for a fun cultural note to anchor 1915 for you, Babe Ruth hit his first career home run in May of that year.
And the beloved Raggedy Ann doll got its patent in September. So it really was a year of iconic national firsts, both serious and lighthearted.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Well, 1915 was unequivocally the year the U.S. stopped being truly neutral.
Even though the declaration of war wouldn't come until 1917, the political memory of those 128 Americans lost on the Lusitania.
Combined with the political pressure, the preparedness movement.
It made that declaration really a matter of time, not choice.
We really see 1915 as a year defined by its extreme paradoxes.
Absolutely. On one hand, you have this incredible, explosive industrial and technological power, the transcontinental phone call, the millionth Model T, all building the foundation of a global superpower.
And on the other hand, these deep internal fractures, the violent lynching of Leo Frank, the resurgence of the KKK, the catastrophic loss of life on the Eastland, it just revealed a society that was struggling violently with basic issues of race, class, and safety.
It leaves you with this provocative thought to consider. The sinking of the Lusitania gave the U.S. a clear external enemy, something it could politically organize and unify against. But the resurgence of the KKK and the violence around the Leo Frank case showed that the nation was, well, maybe it was far more successful at organizing for war abroad than it was at ensuring justice and safety for all of its own citizens at home.
So what does that fundamental tension between runaway technological progress and profound social chaos tell you about the true nature of power in the 20th century?